Hello, and thank you very much for joining us at BookBound 2020, a From Home literary festival. My name is Georgie Codd, and it's my great pleasure today to be hosting a discussion between the two authors, Michelle Paver and Richard Lambert. Our events have been curated in partnership with Wasafiri magazine, and we're raising funds in aid of the UK-based mental health charity Mind. Mind offer advice and support to empower people who are experiencing mental health problems. Their statistics show that on average, in a typical year, 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem. And as we all know, this is far from a typical year. You can make a donation to Mind using the link to the BookBound 2020 Just Giving page for Mind, which should be just beneath this video. You can find out more about BookBound 2020, Wasafiri magazine, Mind, and the authors taking part in our festival by visiting our website, bookbound2020.co.uk. Now, on to our event, which we have called Dark Beasts. Michelle Paver writes for both adults and children. It is for her prize-winning, globally best-selling Wolf Brother series for children that she is best known. Richard Lambert is an author and prize-winning poet whose debut book for young adults, The Wolf Road, is being released soon. Now, I'd like to kick this whole discussion off by asking, Michelle, what drew you to writing about wolves in particular?
I've been asked that a lot, and the short answer, probably the honest answer, is I don't know, because it was just a good idea. But actually, because I've been asked that a lot, I've sort of gone back in my memory, and I realised that wolves have been sort of trotting through my life since my earliest memory. My earliest memory was of a large wolf-like friendly Alsatian dog called Sheba when I was about 2 in Central Africa, where I was born. And she sort of adopted me as her cub and looked after me. And so that was a positive memory. And then I think it was once long ago, that wonderful compilation of legends from all around the world by Roger Lanston Green, which was my Bible as an 8-year-old. And the first story in that was a Native American story called The Boy and the Wolves. I didn't actually realise that until after I'd written Wolf Brother, and I looked back and I thought, maybe that's where it comes from, because this is a long way of saying that I was just really keen on wolves when I was a kid. You know, the way children get sort of passionate about certain things, and I wanted a wolf desperately. But I lived in Wimbledon, so that was not on. I got a spaniel instead, but he sort of became a wolf in my imagination when I took him for walks on Wimbledon Common. I think that's probably where it came from. And then when I became a novelist, and I thought, yeah, a wolf, yeah, that's a good friend to have. You know, great sense of smell, great hearing, top predator, quite good in a fight, very loyal. So the possibilities, and then the idea of writing from his point of view, that's when it really took off. So long-winded answer. Over to you, Richard.
Yeah, I love that. When I read Wolf Brother, the point of view going into wolves' point of view, I loved that.
Thank you.
It was great. I had a similar answer in that I can't really remember why the wolf initially, or where it came from. I certainly wasn't as young. It wasn't as a child, but in my 20s, when I was starting to write fiction, I really I knew I wanted to write something about a wolf. That's like about 15 years ago. I didn't know anything. It was just like the image of a wolf. And collected little bits, like I've logged little bits in my memory. Like I remember in my 20s going to Safari Park and being particularly interested in watching a group of wolves eating, devouring some food they'd been, like a big bit of another animal they'd been given. And then I wrote another YA book, which didn't get published, but that was about a seal. So I was, and I was trying to find another animal when I was doing this story, and it sort of, I thought, oh, no, this is perfect to have, wild animal.
Yeah, Yeah. There's something about them, isn't there? I mean, a seal. When you mentioned seal, I sort of thought, oh yes, because there's that wonderful Kipling story. I think it's in the second Jungle Book, from a seal's point of view. It's called The White Seal, and it's just, I loved that as a child. And when I was writing Wolf Brother, actually, I did reread that just to see how he did it. And of course, a seal is a hunter, but it's not a top predator, so it's got sort of perhaps limitations. But yes, the idea of a wolf. I mean, in the Wolf Road, I have to say I haven't been able to get hold of it yet because this was arranged quite at short notice. But I'm aware roughly of what it's about, and I wondered, a wolf is involved in an accident. That's not a spoiler, but I wondered, you wanted to write about a wolf. Did the idea of its role in the story come to you quickly, or was that sort of something you had to really hammer out?
No, I think I knew it was there, and it was it's sort of central to the story, but it's not like a character, as it were. It's more like a force or a force that the main character is trying to find out about. So it was central to it, but it's kind of always, it hovers at the edge of things.
Yes.
Yes. So there are moments when it comes, when he encounters it, when the hero encounters it. I really liked in your one when did you decide early on that you were going to write in the voice of Wolf, or did that just happen as you were doing it?
No, actually, that's a great question. I mean, that was right from the start, and where that came from was I'd been trying to write for years, and I actually first started seriously trying to write and get published when I was studying biochemistry at Oxford, and I wrote a Mills and Boon in 3 weeks and sent it off, very arrogant, and said, please publish it, and they sent it back and said no, not surprisingly. But anyway, the next one I tried seriously then to write was a children's story set in Viking Age Norway, involving a large bear and a boy and a girl and a wolf cub, because even then I think I'd been reading about wolf behaviour because it had carried on being interested in wolves, and I think I wrote about 2 paragraphs from his point of view just because I felt like it. And of course, it didn't get published; it got rejected. But I kept it. I did keep the typescript, and then about 23 years later, my wonderful agent. I'd got published by then. I was, writing historical love stories, and my wonderful agent said, Michelle, just if you want to sort of try something different, just branch out, whatever. And I looked through some old typescripts, and there was this one from university 23 years before. And I could see, yes, it didn't deserve to be published, but bits of it were not bad. And there were these couple of paragraphs from the wolf cub's point of view. He was called Fen, for Fenris wolf, Norse. And I thought, I like this. And that's where that came from. And that's actually where Wolf Brother came from, because I thought, the story, the boy, the girl, the bear, and the wolf, and a Nordic setting. Viking Age not right, try the Stone Age. So yes, it was always going to be the wolf's point of view in there. Surprisingly, I found it, and I still find it surprisingly easy to write from a wolf's point of view. They're the easiest bits in the books to write. I have no idea why. Did you find it easy to write about? I mean, I appreciate your wolf has a different role in the Wolf Road, but did you find it easy to write about wolves?
I found it hard actually to get that other quality that they think that they're different from, and to describe their movements and how they look.
Oh yes.
And it was. I mean, I've spent a while, like just going to the zoo, which is near me in Colchester, and they've got some there in the zoo, and just like watching them. But I find it quite. I love descriptions of animals, but it was it was a challenge. But
yeah, I think in many ways actually writing from the wolf's point of view is easier than describing them, because I know what you mean. I mean, I don't know, the way a wolf trots, it's a sort of almost floating trot. It's so light on its paws.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever quite, when Torak or Ren, the characters in the stories, are looking at wolf, I don't think I've ever quite caught that sort of, and as you say, the otherness. They're not dogs. I mean, they're different, aren't they? Much as I like dogs.
Yeah. They sort of float along, like you say, or flow along.
Yeah.
Really,
yes. Yes. And sometimes they jump up. Yes. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt you both, but with that beautiful video coming up there, it would be lovely to hear both of you discuss how your experiences of seeing the wolves, and have you met any fun wolf companions or made some friends along the way? Michelle, would you start off telling us more about that video?
Well, that was, I think she's called Mosey. That was, in fact, I know it was called Mosey. I've known, this is at the UK Wolf Conservation Trust, which is now closed to the public, but the wolves are still happily there in retirement. Yeah, that's Mosey jumping up. She's a very enthusiastic wolf. I've known her since she was a little black cub, absolutely enchanting, with sort of green eyes. And she's very competitive and a little bit insecure. And that's Torak, I think. Yes. Well, he was named after. Yeah. I mean, they're just lovely. I'm sorry. No, that's my. Anyway, they all have different characters, and Mosi, as I said, is quite insecure. And so when she's with her sister, she's trying to compete, because I'm sort of above them in the pack, as humans are in their perception. And so she's sort of saying, no, I want to be stroked first. And in that instance, I got off lightly, but there was one time when I was there with them, and she got a little bit too excited, and she sort of pulled away from her sister and bashed me on the mouth. And a wolf's muzzle is very strong. A wolf is very strong, and she gave me a thick lip, which is a little bit tricky, because I had to sort of do a piece to camera shortly afterwards, and I sounded like I'd just had an injection at the dentist's. But she's a lovely wolf. My favourite is Torak, because I've known him since he was a cub. I mean, he was named, not by me, but by the Trust in honour of the hero of the Wolf Brother books. And he's like the character in the books. He's a sort of bit of a loner. And he comes along and says hello and touches noses, and then he goes off. And I don't know if that's been your experience, Richard, but I mean, that's a very marked difference from a dog, who will keep on saying hello if they like you, but a wolf will come and say hello and then go off because they've said hello. So why do they have to hang around? I mean, I find the times I've been with the wolves at the Trust have been magical, and also incredibly useful, because it's all the little foibles and things, the little incidents. So I agree with you, Richard. It's watching the wolves. TV can help as well. Documentaries, let's not knock them, but being with them. I mean, Richard, I read, I think on your website, that you did some research in Romania. Is that right?
No, I did. I have done a little bit of research, but I haven't been to Romania. I was looking to find wolves where I go and see some, and I found some in there was a sort of, I guess it would be a private zoo, or you could go and meet them and there was a place in Cumbria actually, and I found about it there'd been some articles in the press on them, and I contacted them and went went and spent some time with them, and they took me out. They weren't pure wolves. They had bred them because they couldn't get the license or something.
Yeah, it's quite tricky. Yeah.
So they were half wolf and half some other kind of European hunting dog, but they would like.
This is in Cumbria. This is.
Yeah, I think they still go. this company. I'd read about them in the there was an article on them in the Guardian, and
Right.
and so I went there, and yeah, they're much more powerful animals than a dog. Just they're like
Yes.
they are like wild beasts, and
Yes.
they because they were not a pure wolf, they were half and half. They took us out with the wolves into a forest, and they were on ropes, and then they let them go for a short time.
Right.
And they just, the way they moved and the way they behaved was very different from a dog.
Yes.
Yeah. And they at one point, and they just did what they wanted. There was the people who were looking after them couldn't really control them, or get them exactly to do what they want. So, and I love that in your books when there are those little playful moments when Torak, boy, and Wolf sort of play, and he's one of the.
Oh, thank you.
Pack. Yeah, they're really they really they feel like a relationship. I really like that.
Well, that has sort of grown with the series, because at the beginning, thank you for that. I mean, I'm glad that came across. With Wolf Brother, the first book, it's Torak has lost his father dramatically to a bear in chapter 1, and so finding the wolf cub is very much about sort of, oh gosh, I'm bereaved in this forest, and this is this one little cub who is my friend, and so it's pure friendship in the first book. And then I found that in each of the next stories, there was some sort of problem that Wolf was having to work out in parallel with the story. How does he fit into the pack? Or, well, in the second book, it's can he find Torak again? And in the third book, he gets kidnapped, and so he has to deal with the fact that not all taillesses, i.e. humans, are good. And that's been really fun, because with each book, I mean, for example, Viper's Daughter, I didn't actually know what Wolf's problem was going to be. I was concentrating on the fact that Wren in the story has gone off for good reason, and Torak and Wolf have to find her, and they head up to the far north. And it was sort of then discovering, from Wolf's writing in Wolf's point of view, discovering that he's really furious with Wren because she's broken up the pack, From a wolf's point of view, of course, the pack is everything. So, it just goes against the grain for a wolf to desert the pack. So that's quite fun for me. I find that, I'm discovering as I write what Wolf's problem is. And that's a very different way from the way I normally write, because and this is the question I wanted to ask you, Richard, is, because I'm a planner. I plan. I like to plan my story and know, roughly what the climax is going to be, and roughly, it's not a blueprint, but it's sort of, I like to know where I'm going. And I'm aware that there are some absolutely brilliant writers who don't do this, who just sort of set their characters going and see what happens. And I wondered, Richard, I mean, it's perhaps a simplistic to put people into two different camps, but are you a planner or a plunger? Or something in between?
I'm very much a planner. I'd really, I do plot out really quite carefully, but I do leave it a little bit open, bit, and I have plot points that have to happen in each chapter, and roughly know the structure of each chapter as well as the whole. I would, because I was interested, I would really like to be able to write that way that you're talking about. I've heard writers talk about that when they are led by, they don't know what's going to happen. I find that really interesting, and because I've just started by Viper's Daughter, and this week, so I haven't finished it yet. Really enjoyed it.
I forgive you. It's very nice of you to read it.
And I was interested in that, how far the characters were leading, because it seems like you know them really well. You must know them really well now, and how far they were leading you as much as you were plotting out your story. Because when I was doing mine, the one thing I did was my ending. Kind of nothing. I knew the place it was going to go, but I didn't know which way it was going to go.
Yeah.
So the only bit of indecision I had, but I quite like that not knowing, and then at the end, oh yes, I'll do this, and it just seems to naturally come. But I would love to be able to have that more organic way. But
gosh, do you know, that's really interesting, because I've never really envied people who do it like that, just because I suppose my way works for me and I like it and I feel comfortable with it. Perhaps it's because it's a bit of a mixture. I mean, what you've just said, Richard, you know, clearly, you know, you're ending, by then you knew Lucas. It's Lucas, isn't it? It's the main character. You know, you knew him and you'd gone through the story with him, and so, you know, it's kind of natural that you'd come to the ending which would work for him dramatically. I think, you know, I mean, I think it's almost a false distinction in a way, because the planning and people who don't plan sometimes say to me, well, how can you plan? Doesn't it sort of kill the story? Doesn't it make it very dead, like writing by numbers? And I say, no, you're misunderstanding. It's not a blueprint. It's not, you know, sort of, yes, now this is what I will do on this chapter and everything. So like you, I think, Richard, there's plenty of room in the messy business of writing the first draft, which I absolutely loathe, for the characters to surprise me and say, and it's often it's what they won't do, you know, what perhaps I've planned that they should do, and then they decide, you know, it just doesn't work for them on the page. I mean, to give a wolf-oriented example from the 5th book of the Chronicles of the Wolf Brother books, Oathbreaker, I had at one point Wolf stalking, because he'd been mistreated in the 3rd book. He'd been kidnapped and his paw had been trodden on and all sorts of things, and his tail. In the 5th book, I had him sort of stalking with revenge in his heart, this Soul Eater, the baddie. And I was trying to write this scene from Wolf's point of view, and it just wasn't working, you know. And then I came to realise that, you know, if you're actually thinking in terms of a wolf, it makes no sense for a top predator to put himself at risk by going after a human with revenge in his heart. You know, revenge doesn't matter to a wolf. It's about hunting and being with your pack and the strength of the pack. But revenge, no, that's a human emotion, bearing a grudge. So, I mean, wolves can remember, you know, sure, they can remember someone who did them harm and avoid them, but they're not going to go after them. And so that really was an instance where knowing the character and knowing a bit about wolves sort of taught me that what I'd planned was rubbish. So let's do something else. And actually that then gave me, I think, quite a moving sort of scene later on when Wolf realises that Torak is not a wolf. Because until then, he'd really thought he was a kind of strange wolf, you know, without a tail. So that can actually lead to riches in the story. But you can't plan that sort of stuff. You've just got to, as you say, you've got to know your characters, which you do more by the time you've written the story. But I wondered, Richard, you know, I was complaining about writing first drafts. Do you do a lot of rewriting, or are you one of these annoying people who just sort of writes and it's kind of there?
Oh no, it's certainly not there.
Yeah, good.
I mean, I spend quite a bit of time planning and plotting and researching, or I did that with the Wolf one, and then I write quite quickly. So I'll write a first draft quite quickly, you know, several hundred words a day, or maybe a few thousand. And then once I've got it would be too long, and I just kind of believe it. It's all on the page. It's awful. It's just get it on the page, and then it's a real long process then of again and again and again going through it, restructuring a little, not overly, and then really editing the prose down, just because it's just I just write too much, and it's just got sharper and sharper and sharper. And then I've got a couple of good friends who are writers, published writers, who have read, you know, things I've written, and like get who I trust and who give me good feedback. And so, this chapter actually is structurally unnecessary. Get rid of the whole chapter, or it might just be a little scene, or you need to work a bit more on this particular minor character. So then I'll go back to it again, and then it'll be a whole. So it just keep. I think I can just keep going forever with rewriting.
Yes. No. I agree with you there. I mean, I don't know whether you write on the page, but I mean, I do literally. That's a first. Yeah, that's it was going to be chapter 29, became chapter 33 of Ghost Hunter, coffee stains and all. Oh God! And then typing it up on the ancient computer, and then rewriting. I mean, actually, what I call my first draft, I do it chapter by chapter, and I will have probably gone through that about 20 times before I print it and think, yeah, it's okay. That's as good as I can get it, and then I'll go on to the next one. And then by the time I've got what I call my first draft all printed out, it's probably taken about 6 months or so. And then I have this day when I sit down and read the whole thing from start to finish. And by then I've got a whole pile of notes because I've thought, well, I need to change that, or this needs to change, whatever. So I know there's masses wrong with it. And then I read it from start to finish, which gives me a good sort of shape, and I can see, okay, this is where it really lags or lack of clarity. And then what I call the rewrite is I do like it. It's very intense. I've just come out of it literally yesterday. I printed out the sequel to Viper's Daughter and sent it. Well, I hope it's somewhere in the postal system. And that rewrite takes about, well, in this case, it took about 2 months because of a certain pandemic, which is sort of, but that's really fun. I do enjoy it because then I've got something that I can really shape, But interesting you should say that. I mean, about showing it to, trusted writer friends. For some reason, it's just the way it's developed with me. I've never shown it to anybody until, like, yesterday when I sent Skin Taker off to my editor and publisher. Not that I think it's perfect, but it's as good as I can get it, and that's taken about sort of 8 months or so. Do you show sections of your story to the work in progress to the readers, if I can call them that, or do you wait until you've got the whole?
I've waited till I've got the whole thing.
Yeah.
Show it. So they can see the whole shape.
Yes, I agree, because I mean, I don't want it's not criticism because all writers are different, but I mean, I remember talking to one writer who sent each chapter bit by bit and shared it with someone, and it obviously worked for her, but I would find that tricky because as I'm writing what I call the first draft, I already know, and you probably do as well, that there's loads that you need to change and go back eventually. So it'd be quite boring to have to tell the person, oh yes, well look, don't worry about this because these two characters are going to merge or something. So
I think
Sorry,
for
Georgie.
coming in again. I'm just thinking of there'll be quite a few of our audience, I think, who write and are trying to put projects together, especially at the moment with slightly less to do than normal. How Michelle, have you developed that confidence in your own writing skills? Because I think quite a lot of authors feel really dependent on that network of other people, and would be quite scared not to show it to anyone else before they send it out.
You see, that's really interesting because I wasn't confident to begin with, and if I sound confident now, I'm not always when I'm in the writing process, I can tell you. But it was actually a sense of lack of confidence that kept me from showing my work to begin with. I mean, I wasn't worried about sending it off to potential publishers, and saying, please publish me. I mean, because you just get rejection letters, and that's part of it, and you have to pick yourself up off the floor and start again. I've been through all that for years. But when I think it was the fact that I knew that I know I'm a better writer than I am a talker, and so this is why I loathe the sort of synopsis process, and I've never liked telling a publisher the idea of the story before I've written it, because if I see their eyes glazing over, as I will when I'm trying messily to summarise a plot or my idea. I mean, my last Gothic novel, Wakenhurst, I mean, how on earth would I have summarised that? It's a girl growing up in the fens and her father maybe going mad or maybe not. I mean, I would see someone's eyes glazing over and then I would lose faith or confidence in my story, and that I do not want to do. So it's really out of a sort of she-wolf-like protectiveness of the idea, and knowing that I can't really get across. I mean, it's not that it's Dostoevsky and it's, very, very complicated, but it's a messy process, writing. I think Richard would probably agree. Writing a novel is messy and difficult. How on earth are you going to get across the thing that got you keen in the first place? And for that reason, really, rather than a sort of excess of confidence, I just like to keep it to myself. And I have, when I was starting out, I didn't do a course or anything, but I read lots of books on how to write, which was very useful. Taught me something called point of view, which I'd never heard of, stuff like that. And a few of them did say, it's not such a great idea to talk about your writing while you're working on a story. And while you're absolutely right, if you're the kind of writer who just needs that circle of trusted friends or whatever, then ignore what I've just said, because it's whatever works for you as a writer works. But for me, it just doesn't. It really doesn't. I get irritated, I get cross, I get defensive, and it just doesn't work. So I can't even remember what your original question was. I hope I answered it. Over to you, Richard.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. Richard, so you're right at the start of this journey of publishing The Wolf Road, and I wonder how are you feeling about that, and whether you could talk together about that first project going out into the world and what that sensation is like, going from being somebody who writes in a private space to somebody who has to talk about it in an event like this in public.
Yeah, it is it's quite a thing, I think, to go that transition. And it's, I'm really delighted in that the process has been really straightforward with the publisher, Mika at Everything with Words, has been brilliant in helping me put it together, and then has produced it beautifully.
It's gorgeous. The cover, I must say, is absolutely lovely. Really lovely.
So with the cover, it's just lovely. Way,
gorgeous.
And it's been good. It was due actually to be published this month. So for obvious reasons, it hasn't been able to come out because the bookshops are shut and the actual physical book distributors are not distributing books. So it's been pushed back to the October. So it's kind of like, I've been writing for years and years. I guess when you were talking, Michelle, about trying to get work out there for a long time, I've been doing that for many years, and this was the first, this felt like my breakthrough. So that has been difficult, to be within a few weeks of it kind of existing in the world, and then not have it. So, but I've sort of got used to it now. It's been a month or two that I've done that. So I kind of just think, it will happen. And bookshops will at some point reopen. And this actually is the first kind of event that I've done for this project. I've done, because I write poetry as well, I've done poetry readings and little events, but I haven't done sort of promoting work is it feels like a completely new thing to me, to be, to know what to do or what you're expected to do or how you do it. So it is, it's a bit of a learning curve, I guess. And I'm not, it doesn't feel comfortable. Because you're used to just, I am just used to writing in my own private space. and then to have to then go over that boundary or whatever into the world is something new.
I think you're absolutely right, Richard. Yes, it takes me back because nobody tells you that. You know, I said I read books about writing, but nobody tells you that, and they don't tell you how to do it either. Well, I mean, I was not told. You know, you were just told, okay, can you go to this literary festival, please, and can you talk about your book? Well, that's what happened for me, and I mean, I really like just being on my own, writing in my own world with, I mean, you know, it's like having to be two people, I think. It's the real you, which is the writer, which is just, you know, being on your own in your world with your characters for months and months and months, absolutely lovely. And then there's this other person who has to sort of talk, and sometimes it feels like being a performing doggy or something, you know, saying, oh, you know, here's some funny stories about how I wrote, and here's a little piece I've prepared that I can read, or, you know, some stuff I've brought back from research trips. Are they getting bored, you know, and then answering questions. It's really, really, really weird. It struck me as very weird to begin with, and I would get incredibly nervous at the beginning. I remember the first event I had to do was Hay Book Festival for Wolf Brother. I'd never been to a book festival. I didn't know what a book festival was. Nobody explained it to me, and my heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And then this wretched publicity girl said, "Oh, you'll be fine." And I said, "Yeah, how many of these things have you done?" And she said, "Well, I haven't." I said, "Fine, okay. How do you know I'll be fine?" But it is true that you get used to it. I would have, you know, you do, and it's part of it. And actually, it's quite fun. The best bit, I think, is hearing readers' responses. I mean, you must have had this for your poetry, you know, when a poem means something to a reader, and that must be quite good.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely. And I mean, and when you have, because a lot, I mean, the majority of your readers, I guess, are children. I mean, that's a nice thing as well, isn't it? When they come, I guess, when you're doing that.
But they're a mixture, actually, because now actually quite a lot of them have grown up with the Wolf Brother books. So, you know, you can get, in a public event, I can get 10-year-olds, and then I can get 20-somethings. And actually my oldest reader for the Wolf Brother books in 99, I met her at a Wakenhurst event, and she was wheeled up in a wheelchair with her daughter. So you don't know. I mean, yes, the children are. I mean, I think that the difference is, I find, is when halfway through an event, I'll say, okay, so who's got any questions? If it's grown-ups or teenagers, sometimes they'll be sort of, who's going to ask the first question? It's all a bit, you know. But if it's 10-year-olds, you get a forest of little hands. Because there's that difference between, you know, they're just not that self-conscious at that age, but when puberty strikes, then they do start to be. I don't know what it's like. Did you ever throw the floor open at poetry readings and see if you get questions, or are they too intimidated?
I've done one that was a small one, and then somebody actually interrupted me, I think, and then just said, "Well, your poems are too short."
What?
I thought it kind of startled me, but afterwards I thought, no, that's quite good actually. You know, that's what she felt, and it was like, okay, I'll put that on board and roll out my own. So
right.
That's the only time.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, and that is the thing with adults. You can also, and our adult audience, you can also get the strange ones. I mean, I wrote a ghost story set in the Arctic called Dark Matter, and I did an event, and the first question was there was something wrong there, and they started just telling me this long, involved experience they'd had about meeting a ghost, and you could see the audience getting really worried. You know, how are we going to deal with that? And oh gosh, is this person crazy? So, you know, you have to find a way of, you know, saying, well, thank you, that's really interesting. My experience was blah. But yeah, it's a very far cry from sitting quietly writing, which is what we all really want to do, which is not to complain about doing this, because this is actually a really nice way of doing it. There's no travel, of course there's no audience either. Well, I mean, there's no interactive audience, but it's the whole publicity thing is yes, it's quite a business.
It must have. How does it feel when people describe you, like in my introduction, about being a global best-selling, and that you've had millions of copies sold throughout the world, and hopefully one day Richard can have something like that attached to his bio as well. How does that sit with you? What does it feel like to be that author?
It's really lovely. It's absolutely fabulous. It's really nice, because it means lots of people have enjoyed the books. That's the thing. And what I most like about that is, it was a nice introduction. Thank you. In fact, it was a perfect introduction, because it wasn't too long and it was just hit some nice high points. But I think what is nice about being published in different countries is, if you get you get sent a copy of the book in, I don't know, Chinese or something, and I can't even read my own name in Chinese, and yet I know that my story, or some version of it, goodness knows how they're translating the Wolf Talk, is being read and I hope enjoyed by children with whom I couldn't communicate if we met. And that's really a profound feeling, actually, because after all, why do we do this? Well, who knows, because it's a really hard job. It's a kind of compulsion. But part of it is because you want people to enjoy or connect with what you're writing. So that's really where the satisfaction comes from. I mean, the money's nice too, but
I want to ask, because I find the writing very much compulsion, and it has been since I was a teenager, I think.
Right.
Because I'd read, as you were saying, about writing your first novels while you were at university. When did you always write? Were you writing as a child?
I've always liked writing. I mean, I wrote my first sort of story when I was 5 on my mum's typewriter. I was sort of bashing it out, and I liked the idea of controlling characters and things. At school, I would write plays and force my friends to play in them and that sort of thing. But it never occurred I never really formed the idea of being a writer. I mean, I wanted to be a sort of the next David Attenborough, or, not a presenter, but a natural biologist studying animal behaviour. It was at university that, firstly, just to make money, I thought, I'll write Mills and Boon. And then, obviously, that was a failure because I had no clue. I didn't even have a boyfriend, so, you can't write a love story. And that started me on the road to getting published, which took years. Partly because I then took a wrong turn and became a lawyer, which wasn't a very good idea. But so it took me years to get published. So yeah, it is a compulsion. But it took me. It was at university when I realised, this is what I want to do. But of course, I had to earn the living while and. I remember I used to read, I don't know if you ever had this, Richard, but I would sort of read in the paper of so-and-so who'd got her first novel published, she'd just written it, got it published. And I thought, who are these people? It took me 16 years. If you add up all the years, it took me 16 years before I got my first novel published. I don't want to discourage people out there. I was 13 years of that was being a lawyer, and you didn't get much time to write. But it doesn't help when the newspapers just pick on the ones who get published straight off. Have you ever added up how long it's taken you to get?
Well, I started in 2000. I started my first novel. In the year, it was like January 2000. I thought I'm going to start writing a novel. And so that's took 20 years to get my first novel published. It's not that one, of course, but I've written several things. But it just seems, and then it's become like I've always written poetry, but to write stories is a compulsion. I don't think I would stop even if even if it doesn't turn out to be a career, I think we still be doing it. Yeah.
No, I agree with that, actually. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're coming to the last few minutes of the conversation, and it's fascinating to hear you both talk about it. Before we wrap up, I wondered, obviously you alluded to this earlier, Michelle, we are living through a very strange time at the moment. These months are quite peculiar. And I wondered what the two of you were doing at the moment to kind of stay grounded. Were you writing or trying to get outside? Have you got any tips for people at home or things that you think might help them that helped you?
I have to say, it hasn't changed too much because I've been as I said, in the final processes of writing Skin Taker, which is the sequel to Viper's Daughter. So I've been sort of immersed in that. Housework, cleaning the house has completely gone by the board. Half an hour's walk on the common where I live in the morning, early, to avoid the joggers, and then back. And that's it. In terms of keeping sane, I think actually what has helped me is limiting the amount of news I watch, because when the pandemic kicked off, I was watching a lot. I mean, I don't do too much internet-y stuff, but I was just watching, the rolling news on Sky and things like that. And it's fascinating, and as an ex-biochemist, it's quite interesting. But it doesn't do your emotional well-being too much good, because you can't control it. So I think that's a big thing. Limit your exposure to the news, because it doesn't help that much. And read. That helps me stay sane. What about you, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I think the news thing, certainly, I was the same. I was like watching it a lot when when the lockdown first happened, and then when Boris Johnson went into intensive care, I was like following it. And then I deliberately tried not to watch it. I think on a day, I can't manage to check in now and again, but I think I've done 3 or 4 days here and there where I've not looked at the news at all. Yeah. And I've noticed my anxiety levels go like that, they're much better on those days. If I'm watching the news, it's like it's like bad interference on the radio or something. It just in my head. Yes. So I can get on and do more if I don't watch the news. And the other thing that I'm very lucky, I've got very little garden, little patch of lawn at the front, which I've kind of neglected. So I've been doing stuff on that, and which I've never really done any gardening, and that's been really good. I'm very lucky that I've got that space. I actually have grown for the very first time some seeds from indoors as well. So I'm germinating seeds, which are just showing some seedlings now. So that has felt, so it's sort of like, that's actually felt quite, there's some little bits that felt like quite nice, and just having a bit more space for my writing, not the interference of the everyday world. So I've been able to a bit what I'm working on at the moment. So that's there have been a few little bits that are good, but it's felt like really hard work. I have to be quite disciplined in the way I feel about the business, but I feel like I'm having to be quite careful about what I do, just to stay normal.
I think you're right, and actually growing things and being among nature. I've just got an alleyway outside my house because then I look onto the common, but the plan is now to actually plant some pots and stuff like that. And talking about growing things, and since this is for mind as well, there's a member of my family who's suffered from depression for many years, but I don't really use that term suffered, because she's now she's got CBT and she does all sorts of things, measures to control the anxiety and the depression. And obviously this is a huge challenge, being in lockdown, and she's found that her little garden has helped enormously, just actually getting out there and doing a bit of weeding, or just looking at something, keeping the expectations really low, and also cutting down internet time as well. And I think there are programs you can get, or apps that sort of can, I think it's called a Freedom app, which you can choose how long to freeze your entire internet access. So you can't, even if you want to, you can't. And that has really helped with the anxiety and depression. So I offer that as a little tip.
Thank you so much. So weeding and reading is definitely to do. Thank you so much to Michelle Paver and Richard Lambert, and to everyone watching at home and joining BookBound 2020 for this event. We have lots of great events like this on our programme. You can search BookBound 2020 on Twitter and Instagram to learn more and get all of the updates. Please help us spread the word by using the hashtag BookBound 2020. That would be great. If you'd like to buy the work of these authors, and I thoroughly recommend that you do, I've read both books and they're great. There are some links underneath this video. Some will take you to Hive, who's an online bookseller that support independent bookshops, and there's details underneath this video with a discount code for some of our festival titles. Richard's book, you can register interest through Waterstones at the moment and pre-order. As he mentioned in the talk, that book's been slightly delayed by COVID-19, unfortunately, but it will be out soon, so check it out. Also underneath this video, we have included some links to our authors' favourite bookshops. So if you'd like to try and order their work through some local independents, that would be great, and I'm sure they'd appreciate your support too. Lastly, please don't forget the Just Giving link for Mind for Mental Health, which is underneath this video. And thank you so much again. Goodbye.
Pleasure. Good luck with the book, Richard. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much. Bye.